Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Datsun build. In last week's episode, we welded a hole in the floor shut, and that was it. In this week's episode, we're gonna weld 2 holes shut and clean up the rest of the rust in the interior, and we're gonna finish the interior in this episode. I'm gonna make sure that gets done because we gotta move on to other things. There was no 3D printed body kit episode this week because I got super busy, and also Cyberpunk 2077 came out, and I played that for like 2 days straight, and that just killed my week. So, no 3D printed body kit. I'm gonna try to do one next week. I will also release the winners to that poster giveaway in that episode, so stay tuned for that. My arm hurts from holding my phone. I think that's it for the intro. One little announcement is that I'm gonna have some new merch coming pretty soon, so if you guys are interested in slaps and clothing, keep your eye out because I'll have some of that coming very soon. I did miss the holiday rush, but nonetheless, it's getting made. So like I said, in last week's episode, we welded that hole shut. In this week's episode, we're working on these 2 holes and clearing out the rust of the rest of the interior. Now, in last week's episode, I mentioned that we're gonna be using fiberglass Bondo here and here to fill all these pinholes. You can see them really good if I put the light underneath. It's like a neon, it's like a dance. It's like a cyber dance. Cyberpunk 2077. I have played way too many video games this week. Now, we're not gonna use the fiberglass Bondo because I was advised by a few people that if we use fiberglass Bondo in holes these big, that it will most likely just rust through, especially that it's the floor. And there's like water here when you're driving. So we're not gonna do that. We're going to cut this piece of metal out and we're gonna weld in a new piece of metal. And we're gonna do that to this little square as well. This was a lap weld. So we welded, a big piece of metal over a smaller hole. And these are gonna be butt welds. So this is gonna be, the metal's gonna fit perfectly in there and then we're gonna weld it perfectly in there. All right, so let's cut this metal out and then we're gonna cut some metal out of the Subaru fender and we will start welding. Now we got both spots chopped out. This is the metal from the first one. And then from the second one, this was way more deteriorated than I thought it was. Pretty much from here all the way to here was just split open. There's like nothing holding this together. All right, let's cut some fenders. This piece we're gonna do on the groove here, because this piece is rounded, which leads up into the door. Damn, this WRX fender is looking hot. We should throw this on the Subi and see how it actually looks. All right, so we got metal cut. This one already has its bend in it. I tried to cut them as oversized as possible, but I messed up in a few spots just because taking away metal is always easier than adding metal. All right, so it's a little bit big. Now we're just gonna keep cutting metal away until it's a perfect fit. A little bit more off this one side and it should fit perfectly. Test fit number 2. And it fits so perfectly that I'm not even holding it. It's literally just floating perfectly. All right, so this piece is good. Just needs to be cleaned up. Move on to this piece now. Before test fitting it, I'm just gonna clean up these edges just a little bit more. Test fit number 1, or I should say test fit number 2.1? No, test fit number 1. All right, this one's a little bit more snug. It's kind of hard to mimic what I want to do while holding the camera with one hand, but I just need to chop off a little bit more here. Everything else seems to kind of fall through. Oh, and then I need to chop off more down here. So more down here, more over here. Test fit number 2. So I think all we have left is a tiny bit more here and a tiny bit more there. Same places, just more. Test fit number 3 seems to be the winner. It is holding itself. So all we have left with these 2 pieces of metal is we need to clean them up really well and then clean up the metal out here as well so the welds can bond nicely. Now we have all the metal prep, let's get to smelting. All right, so now both of those are welded up and patched. The next thing I want to move on to is the seat rail. You can see right here that the metal is completely split. And this side is split too, but not as bad as that one. So we're going to clean this metal up and then we're going to weld those pieces back together. So now that everything that needs to be welded is welded, we can move to removing all the rust. So you guys might have seen that there are some holes underneath the seat area. And so this time we're gonna try just welding these little bits closed because welding an entire new plate in takes way longer than just filling this in. So we're gonna try that. If it doesn't work, then we will cut it out, but hopefully it works. Day 2 of this episode. So I think I got a little carried away with the welds here. I just kept piling it on and piling it on and piling it on to just kind of like mask the hole as best as possible. And when I was making this big glob here, it, created new holes because the metal is super weak here. And so I just had to keep kind of globbing up and going farther back until the metal, started to hold up. So that looks awful. And we're gonna grind it down. This is all covered and we're gonna grind that down, make sure there's no holes, and then we will move on to more rust. All right, we're gonna hold off on this until I get a better idea of what I wanna do there. All right, now we're gonna move on to the back. We got this rust over here. This was unveiled when we took out the sound deadener. We concluded that the water from the spare tire area most likely kind of wedged itself in there and created some rust just because it's brand new and there is no rot yet. So we're gonna get that out. And now this cleaned up really nicely. So did that, and a little bit over here. Now the only thing left in the trunk is the spare tire hole. There are deposits of rust all throughout this. So we're gonna vacuum it out, clear out all the rust, then the back will be done. One step closer to being rust-free. So now the back area is complete, and now we need to move on to the passenger side. So it's the same deal as the driver's side, bunch of rust right here, and then there's another bump in the floor here. The only thing that's different is that there's no rot here and no rust, so we won't have to weld any patches in there. I'm retracting the statement where I said I don't have to weld on this side. Looks like the rust ate through a lot of the metal down here as well. And so this entire piece is gonna have to get cut out. I think this piece should get cut out as well. This side looks okay. There's like one tiny pinhole, so I'll just weld that tiny pinhole. There's a split in the floor here. Looks like, you know, they hit something on the road really fast and it like broke the floor open. So I'm gonna bash that down with a hammer and I'll just weld that shut. But yeah, this needs to get cut out. We're not gonna do what we did on the other side and just lay a bunch of weld. We're actually gonna fix the other side in the end of this video or the next video because I just don't feel right about that. So let's cut this metal out and weld some more floors. It's so weak that I can like one finger. Oh wow. Yeah, it was literally only held on by one point. And this one cube even just like shot out while I was cutting it. Chomp, chomp. It's like a dinosaur. Here, I'm gonna draw a dinosaur onto it. All right, so the piece almost fits. It's like a little too snug in a few spots, so we're just gonna inch it in and make sure it fits perfectly. That's it. So I touched on this topic briefly in the last episode, but I figured I'd go into it again in this episode. So the reason I'm kind of welding all over the place and not doing the traditional weld where you kind of just go in a straight line, well, it's not a straight line, but it's like a line like this, and you get a really pretty weld like this. The reason I'm not doing that is because I'm welding sheet metal, and sheet metal heats up way too fast for you to do that. So to have a consistent weld like this, it's gonna heat up way too fast and you'll just end up burning holes through your sheet metal. So what I'm doing is I'm doing spot welds all over the piece where I'm welding. So I'll use the sandblaster as an example. I'll spot weld here, and then I'm gonna spot weld there, and then I'm gonna spot weld there, and then there, to try to distribute that heat as much as possible. An issue I was having in the beginning of this episode with those 2 squares we already welded is that I couldn't get a good connection. I kept burning holes, the welds were globbing up a lot, so I wasn't really sure what was going on. And now with welding this square, I think I figured it out. And I think the problem is that I was just overheating the metal too much. So one trick I'm doing, as well as welding all over the place, is blowing the spots that I welded with an air blower like this. It cools down the metal, and then I can continue. So with this piece, I still burnt a hole there, and I think I burnt a hole over here. But in general, these welds are going on so much better than they were on the other side. The only thing that I changed is I tried cooling down the metal with air blower. So if anyone's having super bad issues with flux core welders, burning holes through sheet metal, try cooling down that metal as much as possible. Another thing that might work good are those dusters that people use for keyboards. The air that comes out of that is really cold, so that might help cool it down even faster. Back to welding. Okay, this is very exciting. I was able to get this completely welded, and I pretty much the entire time stayed on the line. On the last 2 squares on the other side, kind of like globbed up on both sides a lot and made these huge like just globs of weld that are unnecessary. So this is looking good. Grinded down, it would look nice and flush. Now we still gotta do the floor over here. We need a significant sized piece for here. And now I know I said I was gonna finish the interior in this episode because I can't film another intro, but I can't finish the interior on this episode. I'm sorry, I'm saying. There's actually like so much more to do on the interior. I don't know why I thought I was gonna be able to get this done in 1 episode. This is gonna be like a 10-part series on its own, the interior. No, not 10 parts. I promise it won't be 10 parts. I don't wanna bore you guys with too much redundant stuff. So something I wanted to note, which I didn't note in this episode or the episode before, is that I'm really new to welding. I'm like really new. Like literally, I just bought that welder. I made a review on it. That was a couple months ago. So a couple months ago, I bought a welder. I made that video, the review video, where I like kind of learned how to weld. But in reality, I was just welding on a piece of metal, learning like, you know, how to hold the stick and whatnot. So I didn't really know how to weld. And now the second time I welded was welding that plate I welded on the last episode in the driver's side floor. That was the first real time I ever welded on anything like real. And then guess when the 3rd and 4th time I ever welded was? It was on the beginning of this episode. So I'm like really new to welding. The 5th time I welded on a real thing was right this second, like just 5 seconds ago. I am gonna redo that clump of weld, like definitely gonna redo that. I'm gonna chop it out, I'll weld in a piece properly. That was a joke. If you didn't get that, that was a joke. It wasn't a joke at the time, but it's a joke now. I'm really happy that I learned how to weld in the end of this video. Seriously, like I'm glad I learned how to do it now than doing it later. Cause like I have been dreading the welding parts of this car because I'm so bad at welding. I'm not good at it. The last part that I just welded taught me that patience is definitely needed with welding. Like it just takes time. You will learn how to weld. If anyone else is having difficulty with welding, just like take your time and practice. I literally, during the filming of this video, I cut up the Subaru fender and I like practiced multiple times because like I needed to practice. Welding's hard. If you're trying to learn how to weld, welding is hard. It is very difficult. Patience, practice. 5th time's a charm, right? So that is it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you guys for commenting. Next week's episode will be more interior stuff, some fixing of, you know, what I did in the beginning of this episode. Also, stay tuned next week. I will have another 3D printed body kit episode coming out along with the winners to the poster giveaway in that episode. That is it. So thank you guys for watching these videos. Really means a lot to me. I'm so glad that I'm not awful at welding. I'm still bad at welding, but just not awful. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks again.